I know it looks like he's gone, but I am telling you, he is not dead. I'm alive!
It's a miracle. Get back!
I handled the situation exactly as we discussed.
I know about that last man.
Please.
I didn't know she would speak. I'm sorry. I swear, forgive me.
He's NRT dead. He's not dead. You're burying him alive. That voice, sharp, trembling, echoing across Ridgeview Memorial Park, did not come from any of the suited mourners or from the podium where the minister stood frozen. No, it came from the last person anyone expected to speak, let alone interrupt. A young black woman dressed in a crisp diner uniform was sprinting down the aisle between rows of chairs, her name tag slightly tilted, her shoes worn from double shifts, and her voice cracking under the weight of desperation's Area Monroe. Gasps erupted like firecrackers through the air. Several guests reached for their phones. A security guard turned. Confused, one of the pallbearers dropped the handle of the golden casket in disbelief. She stopped just feet away from the open grave, her chest heaving, her eyes locked on the expensive coffin that was about to be lowered forever into the South Carolina soil. "He's not dead," she said again, quieter now, but with steel in her voice. "You're about to bury Conrad Wexley alive." A pause fell over the crowd like a blanket dropped from heaven. Then came the whispers. "Who is that?" "She's the waitress from Blue Magnolia." "What's a girl like that doing here? Is this a Black Lives protest or something?" Zariah didn't flinch. She had heard worse, lived worse, and she wasn't here to ask for understanding. She was here to save a life. The man in the casket, Conrad Wexley, had come into her diner 3 nights a week for nearly 2 years. He always sat in the back booth, always ordered black coffee, and always called her Sunshine. He was the last person you'd expect to confide in a waitress, and yet the night before he was declared dead, he did. Now, standing before hundreds of the city's most powerful, Zariah held up a folded linen napkin, stained slightly with coffee and something else, a line of shaky handwriting that read, "If anything happens to me, Jet knows, and if I die, he did it." The crowd rippled with unease. "Someone called the police," a woman muttered. "No," Zariah said calmly, "called the truth." And that's when the wind picked up, flapping the tent drapes, making the whole cemetery feel less like a burial and more like a storm about to break. If you're still here listening, ask yourself this. Would you have believed her? This is not just a scandal. This is a black story the world needs to hear. Because sometimes the loudest truth comes from the quietest person in the room. And if stories like this matter to you, stay close. Subscribe to Black Truth for more moments that reveal the invisible and remind us why every voice matters. Because Zariah wasn't just a waitress that day, she was a lifeline. And what happens next will shake everything. Before she stood in front of a golden casket interrupting a billionaire's funeral, Zariah Monroe was invisible. Not to everyone, of course. Her co-workers at the Blue Magnolia knew her as the girl who never let a cup of coffee go cold. Customers remembered her smile. Bright, genuine, the kind that somehow made your eggs taste better. But beyond the walls of that diner, she was just another young black woman people overlooked, tucked over, or dismissed the moment she walked into a room. She lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in North Charleston with her younger brother, Caleb, who had autism. Their mom had passed from cancer 3 years ago, and ever since, Zariah had been holding the whole world on her shoulders, working double shifts, navigating bills, appointments, and prejudice that often came dressed in polite tones and tight smiles. She was 24, beautiful, though she rarely believed it, skin like deep oak, glowing in the sunlight. Her figure was athletic and naturally graceful. She kept her hair pulled back in a neat twist. Her diner uniform always clean, ironed, and buttoned right to the collar. She didn't wear much makeup. Didn't need to. Her eyes, hazel with flecks of gold, carried a spark, something fierce and warm all at once. And when she smiled, really smiled, it was like watching a sunrise after a hard winter night. Still, for all that, people often saw her as just the help. Every day, Zariah dealt with it. The looks, the assumptions, the comments. whispered just loud enough to hear. The way customers talked over her. The way rich couples barely made eye contact when they ordered. She didn't yell back. She didn't cause scenes. She just noticed, and that's what made her different. Zariah Monroe noticed things most people missed. The way someone's hand trembled just before they spoke. The sudden silence that followed an offhand comment. A new cologne. A mismatched tie. A ring that vanished from a regular's finger. She paid attention, not because she was nosy, but because her mama had taught her. Sometimes, baby, you have to see the invisible to protect the truth. That lesson stayed with her like gospel. It was why she saw Conrad Wexley. Not the billionaire in the headlines, not the CEO who owned half the real estate downtown, but the man, the tired one, the thoughtful one who never once made her feel small. He'd tip well, but more than that, he'd ask how Caleb was doing. He remembered her birthday. He called her Sunshine because he said she reminded him of light in dark places. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, he came in at exactly 7:15 p.m. He'd sit in booth 7, far in the back. He'd order black coffee, a turkey sandwich, and sometimes on good days, a slice of pecan pie. He rarely smiled, but when he did, it was because Zariah had said something clever or gently sarcastic. She knew how to make him laugh, and that mattered because in the last few months before he died, he had stopped laughing. Something at change. He started looking over his shoulder, taking calls in the parking lot, asking for bottled water instead of tab. His voice grew quieter. His questions are sharper, and though he never said it out loud, Zariah could tell he was scared. He was trying to tell her something, and then 3 days before the funeral, he slipped her a linen napkin. Hust folded it, handed it to her like it was nothing, and said, "If something ever happens to me, Zariah, don't let them silence this." She thought it was a joke. She laughed awkwardly, but he didn't laugh back. His eyes locked onto hers with a kind of finality. "Promised me," he said. She did. Then that night, he collapsed. She never saw the paramedics up close, never saw the body. 1 minute, he was at his table. The next the room was full of men in dark suits moving quickly, quietly, and efficiently. No autopsy, no wake. Just an announcement. Sudden cardiac failure. Zariah knew something wasn't right. But what could a waitress do? She almost stayed quiet. She almost convinced herself it was too big, too dangerous, until she read the note again, until she saw that Jed Wexley, the smug, arrogant son who once laughed when she spilled coffee near his designer shoes, was the one delivering the eulogy. Something inside her snapped. She couldn't stay invisible anymore. Because this wasn't just about Conrad. It was about her. About how often black women are told to be quiet, to serve without speaking, to smile through insults and carry truths no one wants to hear. Zariah Monroe wasn't having it not tease time, and if they wanted to call her crazy, so be it. She'd rather be loud and right than silent and complicit, and that's how a waitress became a witness. And maybe, just maybe, something more. It was a Wednesday night, the kind of night where everything felt a little off. The air was heavy with humidity. The clouds hung low over Charleston, and the Blue Magnolia was unusually quiet for midweek. Zariah had just refilled the salt shakers and was wiping down booth 7 when she heard the doorbell chime. Soft but sharp. She glanced up, and there he was, Mr. Wexley. Except he didn't look like himself. His suit was wrinkled, not in the usual long day at the office way. No, this was different. His collar was slightly stained. His tie was missing, and his eyes, normally so guarded, looked haunted, like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't go straight to his booth, either. He stood near the door for a second, scanning the room like he was checking for someone or watching to make sure no one was following. Then, finally, he moved. He slid into booth 7 with a heavy breath, his body slumping into the leather like it weighed 100 pounds more than it used to. Zariah approached cautiously, her notepad in hand. "Your usual, Mr. Wexley?" she asked gently. Didn't they answer right away, just nodded once, a slow, tired nod. Zariah turned to walk away, but his voice, low and strained, called her back. Sun sheen. She stopped. "Can I get bottled water tonight?" he asked, without looking up. "Of course." She returned a moment later with his drink. As she set it down, she noticed something odd. The water, still sealed, looked perfectly fine, but when she opened it and poured it over ice, a faint scent hit her nose. Something sweet, artificial, almost metallic, like cough syrup. She froze. "Is something wrong?" Conrad asked, eyes suddenly sharp. Zariah blinked. "No, sir," she lied. "Just strong brand tonight, I guess." He stared at her a second longer than necessary, then reached into his coat pocket. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled out and neatly folded a white linen napkin. On it, in small block letters, was handwriting she didn't recognize. He handed it to her. "Don't read it here," he whispered. "Keep it safe," she hesitated. "What is this?" Conrad's eyes flicked toward the window where headlights passed and disappeared. "If something happens to me," he said, "you'll know what to do." Zariah didn't answer. She couldn't. Her heart was suddenly racing. Something about the way he said it didn't feel metaphorical. It felt like a goodbye, a final one. She tucked the napkin into her apron beneath the receipt pad and tried to steady her hands as she took the rest of his order. He didn't touch the water. He didn't touch the sandwich either. He just sat there hunched like a man watching his own countdown. At 8:01 p.m., 3 men in suits walked into the diner. They didn't smile, didn't order. One of them gave her a hard stare as they approached the booths. Conrad stood, no coat, no goodbye. He nodded once at Zariah, his lips barely moving. "Remember what I said." Then he left with them, walked out into the parking lot, and vanished into the shadows between 2 cars. No limo, no driver, just him and those men. Zariah stood frozen behind the counter, her knuckles wide on the edge of the cash register. Something wasn't right. Every part of her screamed it. She wanted to call the police. But say what? A rich guy looked tired and handed her a napkin. No one would listen. The next morning, the news broke. Conrad Wexley, 63, prominent CEO of Wexley Development Corp., passed away from sudden cardiac failure at his home. Private funeral services are pending. No investigation, no further details, just gone. Zariah read the article 3 times. Then, hands shaking, she pulled the napkin from her apron drawer. It had a time, a date, and a line of text that made her stomach drop. "If I die, Jed knows, and if they bury me fast, check my pulse." She read it again, then again. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't sleep that night. The funeral was set for Saturday, less than 3 days after his death. No opened casket, no church, just a graveside ceremony, restricted attendance, closed to media. It was all happening too fast, and Zariah, she wasn't invited. She was never supposed to be near that cemetery. But something in her knew if she didn't speak now, she might never get another chance. Because Conrad Wexley wasn't just her favorite customer. He was a man trying to scream through silence. And she was the only one who heard him. Saturday morning arrived wrapped in stillness, the kind that made your skin crawl, like something was about to break. Charleston's air felt thick, the kind of heat that stuck to your chest and made even a black suit feel like armor. Ridgeview Memorial Park was overflowing. Security lined the outer gates. A local news crew stood behind a taped-off barrier, whispering into microphones. This wasn't just a funeral. It was a statement. A billionaire laid to rest quietly, quickly under polished white tents with gold trim. No public procession, no eulogies were streamed live, just a close guest list of handpicked business associates, old money families, and political figures who had once raised glasses in Conrad Wexley's home. All of them in black. All of them silent. Zariah Monroe was not on that list. She stood behind a tree iron for over 30 minutes watching limers roll and watching the guards wave people through. Her diner uniform was gone. Today she wore simple dark jeans, a fitted navy blouse and flats. Quiet, respectful, but firm. Her hair was pulled back tight, and in her pocket were the napkin and the vial she had found behind booth 7 that morning, tucked between the cushions where Conrad used to sit. She gripped both like they were the last truth left in the world. The funeral had already begun. A pastor stood beside the casket, reading from a small Bible. The crowd of mourners bowed their heads as the words filled the air, and that's when Zariah stepped forward. No microphone, no spotlight, just her voice. "Stop!" People looked. Gasps flew around like broken glass. The pastor stopped in the middle of a sentence. 2 pallbearers were already moving the casket, which was perfectly sealed and brushed with gold, toward the grave. I said, "Stop. He's not dead." Zariah cried out. For a moment, the world stilled. Then came the murmuses. "Who is that? Oh my God. Is that the waitress from the Magnolia? She must be lost. No, she's crazy. She's black. Probably just wants attention." Zariah's breath caught, but she didn't back down. She pushed through the stunned crowd and stepped onto the grass where the casket waited. Her voice didn't shake now. "My name is Zariah Monroe," she said, "and Conrad Wexley isn't dead. Not yet." There was laughter. A man in a dark gray suit muttered, "Someone called security." A woman in pearls scoffed, "This is disgraceful." But Zariah held up the napkin, folded, slightly stained, still readable. "This is from him," she said, turning slowly so everyone could see. "The night before he died, Gabi Matisse. It says, if I die, Jet knows. And if they bury me fast, check my pulse." Now the laughter died. Some people looked to the front row where Jet Wexley stood frozen, jaw tight, lips white. "Enough," Jet barked. "This is a private event. Get her out of here." But Zariah wasn't finished. "I served your father for 2 years. I know when he's scared. I know when he's hiding something. And I know what I smelled in that water the night he collapsed." "Miss," the pastor tried gently. "This isn't the time." "No," she cut in. "This is the only time. You're burying a man who might still be breathing, and I'm not going to let that happen." Security began moving in slowly, uncertainly. But-whose tenor voice spoke from the edge of the tent. "Wait," said a young woman in a dark suit. "Phone in hand, let her speak." It was Ava Beck, a junior field reporter covering the funeral unofficially. She had been recording from the barrier, but now she was stepping in. Her camera still rolling. "If what she's saying is false, let's prove it. But if it's not, and you bury that man today, there's no coming back." A hush fell again. All eyes turned to the casket, then to Jet, then back to Zariah. She reached into her other pocket and pulled out the vial. Small amber glass, a faint label nearly scratched off. "I found this where Mr. Wexley always sat," she said. "This smells like what was in his water. It's not over the counter. It's not something people carry around. Someone gave this to him." Jet stepped forward, shaking with rage. "This is a scam," he hissed. "A sad little waitress trying to make headlines. She's delusional." "Maybe," Ava said, locking eyes with him. "Or maybe she's the only person who gives a damn what really happened." The pastor set down his Bible. The pallbearers backed away. Even the security team seemed unsure now. Zariah pointed to the casket. "Open it," she said. A moment of silence. Then someone moved. A woman in her 50s, seated beside Jet, rose slowly. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "If there's even a chance," she said, "we have to check. For God's sake, he's my brother." Jet's face turned white, and just like that, the moment shattered because the funeral wasn't just a goodbye. It was about to become a crime. Scene. Jet Wexley was the kind of man you noticed instantly, but for all the wrong reasons. Standing 6 feet tall and always dressed in designer suits and Italian loafers, Jet had the kind of presence that tried to scream power. Sharp jaw, slicked back hair, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. To strangers, he looked like a man born to win. But to those who knew him, Jet wasn't power. He was entitled. He was the only child of Conrad Wexley, a self-made billionaire who had grown his real estate empire from the ground up. Conrad had started in construction, real hands-on work. while Jet had been raised in a world of boardrooms, backroom deals, and private jets. He had never lifted a hammer, never walked a muddy job site, and never made a dollar that wasn't handed to him first. Still, Jet liked to pretend he earned everything. He ran around Charleston's elite circles, hosted charity galas at rooftop bars, played golf with state senators, and dated models who didn't know how to pronounce his last name. He smiled for magazine covers, gave short interviews, and quoted books he never read. His life was curated, polished, and aggressively empty. But there was one thing Jet never had: his father's full respect. Conrad was old school. He believed in merit, in hard work, and in integrity. He didn't care about photo shoots or flashy speeches. He cared about what you built, what you protected, and who you became when no one was watching. And deep down, Jet knew he could never measure up. That resentment simmered for years, boiling beneath the surface while father and son sat across from each other in long board meetings. Publicly, they smiled. Privately, they argued. Conrad had always kept his son on a leash when it came to the company. He let Jet run some subsidiary ventures, mostly for show. But the real decisions, the important assets, those stayed in Conrad's hands. And Tenna Boot, 6 months before his supposed death, something changed. Jet began pressuring the board for more access, more control. He floated the idea of a new digital division, a risky investment in crypto-based property sales. The board wasn't convinced, and neither was Conrad. The two clashed during a heated meeting at the Wexley Tower. Dad Jed had snapped, slamming a record on the table. "You treat me like a damn intern." Conrad didn't even flinch. "You act like one," he replied. From that moment on, it was war. Jed began working behind the scenes, building quiet alliances, manipulating longtime staff members who were loyal to the paycheck more than the principal. He pushed for documents, asked questions he had no business asking, and more than once, he was caught snooping around confidential records. Conrad responded by tightening security, limiting access, and drawing up plans for a full succession overhaul. But that overhaul never happened. Instead, Conrad dropped dead, and Jet somehow took center stage. He announced the death to the board with a solemn voice, called for a quick burial, quoted his father's will without showing it, and insisted on no press involvement, claiming his father would have wanted it this way. Within 2 days, he was named interim CEO. But people whispered. Even before Zariah stepped forward at the funeral, something about Jet's behavior felt rehearsed, too calm, too precise, too ready. And there were questions. Why was there no autopsy? Why did Jed refuse a second opinion? Why was Dr. Carl Higgins, the family's usual physician, replaced by a private consultant no one had met before? Still, no one had proof. Not until Zariah. Because what Jet didn't expect was that someone like her, someone beneath him, might be the one person watching closely enough to connect the dots. To him, Zariah was a nobody, a background extra in the script of his life, just another face pouring coffee. But she had remembered everything: the napkin, the bottle, and the look on Conrad's face that night at the diner. And now, in front of hundreds of people under the white funeral tent, Jet stood pale and silent as that truth finally caught up to him. His eyes darted toward the security guards, toward the pastor, toward the edges of the crowd, anywhere but toward the casket. Because for the first time in his life, Jet Wexley wasn't in control. And if Conrad Wexley was still breathing in that box, everything Jet had schemed for, lied for, and nearly killed for was about to collapse. The vial didn't look like much. It was small, barelidos in tall, with a cracked amber tint and a worn, half-torn label that had faded from time and friction. But in Zariah's hand, that vial felt heavier than gold. Because it wasn't just glass. It was the thread holding truth and justice together. She found it tucked between the booth cushions at the Blue Magnolia, right where Mr. Wexley had always sat. Maybe he'd hidden it. Maybe it fell out of his pocket during that final nervous visit. Either way, when she picked it up, something inside her clicked, like a puzzle piece she didn't know was missing had just fallen into place. Now, standing at the edge of the funeral tent, Zariah held it up for all to see. "This," she said, her voice steady, was found exactly where Mr. Wexley sat. Night before he collapsed. It doesn't belong to any medication I've seen. It's not over the counter. It's not a vitamin. It smells sweet, but not right. Artificial. Dangerous. There were murmurs in the crowd again. People shifting in their seats, turning to each other, whispering questions. A man in the second row leaned toward his wife and whispered, "That's not adrenaline. That's not insulin." "What is that?" "I think it's time for someone else to take a look," came a voice from the back. A woman stepped forward. Tall, confident, hair pulled into a low bun, a stethoscope draped across her shoulder like a badge of purpose. Dr. Ileana Torres Charleston, General Stop Trauma Specialist. She approached with calm steps, her eyes meeting Zara's with quiet respect. Zaraya handed over the vial. Without hesitation, Dr. Torres examined it for barely 10 seconds before she looked up. "This isn't a supplement," she said. "It's not something you find at CVS. It's a paralytic compound." Gasps. She held it higher. In small doses, it slows down the body's systems. Heart rate, respiration, and even brain activity. The victim can appear dead to the naked eye. Cold. Still. No pulse. Detectable by touch. But they're alive. Barely. Now, people were standing. The pastor closed his Bible, his hands trembling slightly. One of the pallbearers paused himself and stepped away from the casket. Saraya swallowed hard, adrenaline now rushing through her like fire. "This is what I smelled in his water," she said, right before he collapsed. "This is what he warned me about." Jet stepped forward, face red, eyes wild. "This is insane. None of this proves anything. You're just going to believe some waitress over years of medical records?" Dr. Torres narrowed her eyes at him. "That's funny," she said, "because I'm the hospital's trauma lead, and I never saw a single record for Conrad Wexley." The crowd turned as one. "I never signed a death certificate," she continued. "I never saw a coroner's report. I was never consulted, not even notified. And if what I think is true, then whoever declared him dead did so without a real exam. Which means," Saraya added, "we may be burying a man who is still alive." The moment cracked open. People moved. A woman in the front row collapsed into a chair, tears forming. 2 men rushed toward the casket. Even the funeral staff, the ones dressed in all black, trained to be invisible, were now frozen, unsure what to do. Jed tried again. "She's lying," he shouted. "This is all lies. None of it matters. My father was sick. He had a history of heart trouble." "No, he didn't," said a quiet voice from the crowd. It was Mr. Bennett, the family's old accountant. Elderly, kind, and now furious. "I managed his records for 2 decades. Conrad Wexley had the resting heart rate of an athlete and 0 history of heart disease." "You forged something, didn't you, Chet?" Jet stepped back, suddenly unsure of where to run. Dr. Torres placed her stethoscope around her neck, her voice firm. "I need the casket open now. Right now." The guards looked at Jet. He didn't say a word. They opened it anyway. The hinges groaned. The lid lifted slowly. Inside was Conrad Wexley, still pale, cold, but not stiff and not blue. Dr. Torres reached for his wrist. Seconds passed. Then her eyes widened. "There's a pulse," she whispered. "It's faint, but it's there." The silence that followed was deeper than grief. It was the sound of a room realizing that everything it had believed was wrong. When Dr. Torres confirmed the pulse, chaos broke loose. Phones flew up into the air like fireworks. People fought for video. Reporters yelled questions, and the crowd, which had been quiet and orderly, suddenly became very confused. The white funeral tent, which had been so carefully set up for a dignified goodbye, now felt more like the front row of a scandal that was happening right now. Soraya stepped back, heart pounding, but not from fear, from clarity. She had done it. She had been the voice no one wanted to hear, and now they had no choice but to listen. Jed stood frozen beside the casket, face pale, jaw clenched, tight. For a man who had spent his life rehearsing control, this moment had stripped it all away. He looked around for allies, for someone to back him, but all he saw were eyes, wide, horrified, judgmental. The pastor moved to the side. One of the board members of Wexley Development, a heavy-set man named Carl Durem, stepped toward the casket. "You telling me?" Esaida slowly. "We were about to bury the company's founder alive, under your orders." Jet didn't answer, but the answer was already written all over his face. Carl turned toward the rest of the board members seated in the front row. "This is criminal," he muttered. "We can't sweep this under." One woman nodded, another already typing on her phone. Whispers became strategy. Strategy became alignment. The balance of power was shifting fast. "Jet," Kara said, voice louder. "Now, you're suspended. Effective immediately." "You don't have the authority," Jet snapped. Carl cut him off. "You don't have a position. Not anymore." Security moved in before Jet could respond. Not the hired guards from the event, but a private detail from Wexley Tower. The same men who used to take orders from Jed now stood between him and the board. "What is this?" he shouted. "You can do this. This is my company." A woman from the board stood up, adjusting her glasses. "No, Jed. This was your father's company. You were supposed to inherit it. But not like this. Not through deceit. Not through murder." Those words hit harder than the Carolina heat. Murder. No one had said it out loud until now, but everyone was thinking it. A man doesn't end up paralyzed, drugged and locked inside a coffin by accident. This wasn't negligence. This wasn't grief. This was intentional, and Jet was at the center of it. He lunged toward Zariah suddenly, his face twisted in rage. "This is your fault," he screamed. "You ruined everything. You should have stayed in your lane." But before he could reach her, 2 security guards grabbed his arms and pinned them behind his back. Zariah didn't flinch. She looked him straight in the eyes. "I'm not in anyone's lane," she said. "I just knew the truth when I saw it, and I didn't let fear bury it." Reporters crowded closer now, cameras rolling, flashes bursting. "What was your plan, Jet?" Someone yelled. "Were you going to take over the company after your father's death? Who else was involved? Did you hire the doctor?" But Jet had gone silent again. His face collapsed into something pitiful. Not angry, not powerful, just small. As officers arrived on site, called in by the board's emergency security line, Dr. Tao stayed by the casket, checking Conrad's breathing and carefully adjusting his posture to allow more airflow. Paramedics were en route. The crowd had quieted now, moved from anger to awe. They weren't watching a scandal anymore. They were witnessing a resurrection. Inside the casket, Conrad's eyes fluttered. Just once, a flicker, barely there, but enough. Enough to change everything. Carl stepped back, speaking softly into his phone. "Get the legal team and bring the press department. We've got a lot of explaining to do." Zariah exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. She didn't cry. Not yet. There wasn't time, but something deep inside her chest. Something that had been tight for so long finally loosened. Conrad was alive. The truth had broken through, and the man who had tried to bury both was finally buried in something else. The collapse of his own lies. By Sunday morning, the story wasn't just news. It was a wildfire. It burned across Charleston first, then through every major media outlet in the country. Headlines exploded like sirens. Billionaire CEO found alive at his own funeral. Son of real estate mogul accused in shocking attempted murder plot. Black waitress saves CEO from premature burial. Everyone wanted the exclusive. Every channel scrambled for interviews. Talk shows booked emergency segments. TikTok was flooded with amateur footage from the cemetery. Zariah's voice, steady and clear, cutting through the noise. The moment she shouted, "He's not dead," became an instant soundbite. Millions watched it. Millions shared it. By Monday, her name was trending nationwide. Saya Monroe hashtag he was still breathing hashtag justice for Conrad. Even global media chimed in. British tabloids compared the case to a twisted modern fairy tale. Journalists in Brazil, South Korea, and France, They all ran versions of the story. A black waitress uncovers a conspiracy at the highest levels of American wealth and power. You couldn't write a better movie if you tried. But this wasn't fiction. It was the raw, messy, unbelievable truth. And Zariah Monroe had become its reluctant center. She didn't ask for fame, didn't plan it. She was still working her shifts at the Blue Magnolia, still living in that 2-bedroom apartment with her brother Caleb. But every time she left the house, someone recognized her. Cameras followed her to the grocery store. People asked for selfies. Strangers hugged her, thanking her for being brave enough to speak. She handled it with grace. Quiet, humble. She answered questions when she could and declined the ones that dug too deep. She'd never chased the spotlight. But somehow it kept finding her, because while the nation fixated on the drama, the scandal, the betrayal, the billionaire almost buried alive, there was something deeper pulling at people. Zariah represented something. She was the woman no one believed, the voice no one was supposed to hear. She looked like the people most often overlooked in America. Young, black, and working class. She didn't come with wealth or a title or polished PR statements. She just came with the truth, and when no one else stared, said she did. That mattered. People were tired of watching corruption go unpunished, tired of seeing money silence justice, tired of watching people like Jed Wexley rise through life without ever being held accountable. So when Zariah spoke, it didn't feel like just another viral clip. It felt like vindication. The media turned their eyes on Jednaks, and they did not go easy. Photos surfaced, emails leaked. Former assistants stepped forward. A former intern claimed Jed once paid him off to cover up a car accident. A business partner accused him of stealing confidential contracts. What started as suspicion at a funeral quickly spiraled into a mountain of federal and civil investigations. Wexley Development released a statement by Monday night. We are fully cooperating with authorities. The company has launched an independent internal review and has placed Jet Wexley on indefinite leave. Our founder, Conrad Wexley, remains under medical supervision and is expected to recover. The tone was sharp, cold, clearly drafted by lawyers, but it couldn't hide the truth anymore. The empire was cracking, and the public had chosen a side. Zariah's face appeared on murals downtown, on posters in classrooms. Artists painted her standing tall in front of a coffin, arms raised, mouth opened in a shout. One image went particularly viral, her hand holding up the tiny vial, the very one that stopped a burial and exposed the plot. Someone added the caption in bold white letters, "The truth is never too small to save a life." Meanwhile, online commentators dissected every angle of the story. Podcasts invited psychologists to unpack family trauma and inheritance greed. Morning news anchors got emotional reading parts of the napkin out loud. Even people who didn't care about business scandals found themselves glued to the story. To the story, not because of the money, but because of what it revealed about human nature. Beneath wealth and fame, the lies still rot. But sometimes all it takes is someone watching closely, someone like Zariah Monroe, to stop the rot from spreading. As the media storm raged, Zariah kept showing up to work, kept tucking her brother in at night. She didn't forget where she came from. And while the world tried to make her a hero, she kept telling people the same thing. I didn't do anything special. I just didn't look away. But deep down even Zariah was beginning to realize that might have been the most powerful thing of all. The ambulance raced through Charleston's quiet streets, its sirens splitting the air like a warning to the whole world. He's alive. He's not gone yet. Inside the emergency vehicle, Dr. Eleanor Torres sat at Conrad Wexley's side, her gloved hands steady despite the chaos. Her eyes never left the monitors. Heart rate faint but steady. Respiration shallow but there. Blood pressure low but not critical. He was hanging on barely, but it was enough. Keep the oxygen steady, she instructed the paramedics. His nervous system still. Suppressed. We need to give the antidote as soon as labs confirm the compound. Zariah sat in the corner of the ambulance, pressed into the narrow space between the equipment and the door. She'd refused to stay behind, and Dr. Torres hadn't tried to stop her. She didn't say anything now, just watched. Watched as the man who had always left exact 30% tips and called her Sunshine. Instead of Miss now lay there pale and limp, caught somewhere between death and something much more fragile, hope. The ambulance pulled into the UR entrance of Charleston General. Lights flooded, staff rushed out with a gurney. There was no confusion, no wasted movement. They were already briefed. This was not an ordinary patient. This was Conrad Wexley. Within minutes, he was rushed into Trauma Room 3. Dr. Torres called out meds, vitals, and timing, like a conductor leading an orchestra of urgency. Let's start an IV of D5 and lactated ringers. I want to talk screen in 5. And someone get me urology. He may need a full MRI if he makes it through the hour. Soraya stood behind the glass partition, arms crossed over her chest. She didn't realize she was holding a breath until one of the nurses offered her a chair. She shook her head. She couldn't sit. Not yet. Inside the trauma room, the antidote was administered. It was a precise compound, the kind of countered tetrodotoxin and other paralyzing agents. The vial Soraya had found had been confirmed in the lab, traceable to a supplier known only to private medical consultants, the kind Jed Wexley had recently hired under vague consulting agreements. They now had evidence. But right now, none of that mattered. Only the man on the table did. 5 minutes passed. 10 Ds. Monitors beeped. Air pumped through tubes. Nurses moved like shadows, fast and trained. But even they knew this could go either way. Then it happened. A twitch. At first, no one was sure. Just a small jerk in his right index finger. Then a shift in his brow. His eyelids fluttered. A slow, heavy blink like someone waking from the deepest sleep imaginable. Dr. Torres leaned in, voice calm but commanding. Mr. Wexley, if you can hear me, blink again. There was a pause. Then they blinked. Gasps rippled through the room. Soraya covered her mouth, tears rising for the first time since this nightmare began. The tension inside her snapped like a wire stretched too far. She had carried this moment for days, and now he was here, alive. The monitors began to stabilize, heart rate improving, breathing eases, brain activity returning to normal. He wasn't just alive. He was coming back. Dr. Torres turned to the nurse beside her, notify the board, and prep him for a private room under protective watch. He's not out of danger, but he's responding. She stepped out to find Soraya still standing in the hallway. He's conscious, Torres said softly. Not fully lucid yet, but he knows where he is. And he blinked when I said your name. Soraya's knees almost buckled. Later that night, she was allowed into his room for just a moment. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that holds meaning. Conrad lay propped up slightly, color returning to his face. He looked older now, like time had passed differently inside that box. His eyes opened when he heard the door. Sunshine, he rasped. His voice cracked and rough like gravel. Soraya laughed through her tears. Hey, Mr. Wexley. He tried to smile, but it was weak. I told you not to let them bury me too fast. You also forgot to mention you were writing crime novels in real life. He chuckled just once, but it was real. Thank you, he whispered. You saved me. Soraya walked to his bedside and took his hand. I just didn't look away, she said. He squeezed her fingers, and in that dim hospital room with nothing but the beep of monitors and the hum of healing all around them, the truth finally felt safe. The courthouse steps were swarmed. Reporters, cameramen, onlookers, protesters, supporters, people with signs, people with questions. People are just trying to see justice happen in real time. It had been 3 weeks since Conrad Wexley woke up in that hospital bed, and now the case of the state of South Carolina versus Jed Wexley was about to begin. The charges were staggering. Attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, tampering with medical records, abuse of power, attempted unlawful burial. The media dubbed it the funeral case, and at the center of it all was Jet. Now, without his designer suits, without his charm, without the smug smirk he once wore like armor, he'd entered the courtroom in a standard gray suit, hair disheveled, face pale, and lips pressed tight. He He looked like a man who had gone from penthouse to prison in less than a month because he had... Zariah sat in the third row behind the prosecution bench. She wasn't there to celebrate. She was there to witness. She owed Conrad that. She owed herself that. The courtroom buzzed with energy. But when Judge Martha Allison entered, firm, silver, and known for her zero-tolerance approach, the room settled like ice. "This court will now hear opening statements," she announced. The prosecutor, Dana Wallace, was fierce and composed. A black woman in her late 40s, she stood with the calm fire of someone who had worked too hard and seen too much to be intimidated. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "we are not here for a tragic misunderstanding. We are not here for family drama. We are here because a man tried to steal an empire by silencing his father permanently." She turned and pointed toward Jet. "He drugged his own blood, declared him dead without a valid examination, arranged a funeral so quickly that no questions could be asked. Why? Because he wanted the throne, and he thought no one would stop him." She let the silence linger, but someone did. Her eyes briefly landed on Zariah. "Truth does not always come from power. Sometimes it comes from the ones no one thinks to listen to." The defense attorney, David Rohr, took the floor next. He was tall with a weathered face and a silk voice. He argued that Jed acted out of grief, that the death appeared natural, that the substance in question was never conclusively tied to his client, but it was weak, and everyone in that room knew it. Then came the witnesses. Dr. Alina Torres testified first. Her credentials were airtight. Her testimony was clinical, precise, and unshakable. The compound administered to Mr. Wexley was a rare paralytic, not available over the counter. It mimics death. The dose found in his system was non-lethal, but effective. Someone intended for him to appear dead just long enough to be buried. Next came Travestine, the nurse who helped forge the death certificate under pressure. His voice shook as he admitted his role. He said it was already handled, that the family had consented. I didn't know what I was signing until it was too late. I thought I was covering a formality. Primera ja wa es wrong. But the most powerful testimony came from Conrad Wexley himself. He had recovered enough to sit upright, though he walked slowly and spoke with strain. But his voice, raspy and cracked, carried more weight than anything else in the courtroom. He looked straight at his son. "You looked me in the eye 3 days before it happened," he said. "Told me you'd take the company by force if you had to. I didn't believe you then. I didn't think my own son would go that far." He paused, gathering breath. "But you did." He looked toward the judge. "I forgive him, Your Honor, but I don't excuse him. He didn't just try to take my life. He tried to bury truth, bury accountability, bury the very values that this company and this family were built on." The courtroom was still. Even Jet didn't look up when Zariah was called to the stand. She told the story without tears, without anger, just truth. From the night at the diner to the napkin to the smell in the water to the shout that stopped the burial. "I didn't know what I was doing," she said softly. "I just knew something felt wrong and I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try." By the time the closing statements were made, there were no more questions, no more doubts. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood, voice firm. "We find the defendant, Jet Wexley, guilty on all counts." There was no applause. Just breathe. One collective breath the entire courtroom had been holding. Judge Ellison's sentence came swift. "Mr. Wexley, your privilege bought you time. Your money bought you silence. But neither will buy you freedom. You are hereby sentenced to 35 years in state prison without parole." Jed didn't fight, didn't scream. He just sat down alone. As the gavel struck, Zariah turned toward the window. Sunlight streamed through the glass like a quiet promise. Justice had been served. But for her, it was never about revenge. It was always about truth. And now, the truth had finally been heard. 6 months later, the Blue Magnolia had a new look. The neon sign outside still buzzed softly in the early evening, but now it gleamed just a little brighter. Inside, the walls were freshly painted. The chairs didn't wobble. The jukebox still played Sam Cooke and Eddie James, but now it shared the playlist with Alicia Keys and her. And every Saturday night, the smell of cornbread and pecan pie floated out the windows, wrapping itself around the block like a hug. But the biggest change wasn't the paint or the chairs or even the new laminated menus. It was the name stitched on the inside of the owner's apron, Zariah Monroe. She didn't buy the blue magnolia. It was given to her. Conrad Wexley, in one of his first public acts after recovering, called a press conference in front of the courthouse steps. His voice was still rough, his posture slower, but the fire in his eyes had returned. "I owe my life to this woman," he said, pointing to Zariah, who stood quietly beside him in jeans and a denim jacket, visibly uncomfortable under the weight of cameras. "And when someone saves your life, you don't repay them with applause or medals. You give them a legacy." A few days later, the paperwork was signed. The deed was handed over. The blue magnolia, where Zariah had worked late nights, dodged insults, wiped down booths, and poured coffee for strangers who barely made eye contact, now belonged to her, and she didn't waste it. Zariah turned it into more than a restaurant. She turned it into a community. She hired local teens for summer jobs, opened the back room for tutoring during school months. Every Sunday, they hosted free community dinners for anyone who needed a meal. No questions asked. Artists painted the walls with murals of local heroes, teachers, nurses, bus drivers, and janitors. One corner was reserved for a simple painting, Zariah holding up that tiny vial, and behind her, in soft strokes, the face of Conrad Wexley, eyes closed, a single tear rolling down his cheek. The words beneath the painting read, "Every life has worth, every voice has power." People came from all over to eat there now. Not just for the food, though the sweet tea had become a legend, but for what it meant. The blue magnolia had become a symbol of resilience, of quiet bravery, of what happens when someone refuses to stay silent. But Zariah didn't let it change her too much. She still rode the same used bike to work, still took care of Caleb, her younger brother, helping him finish high school and apply for scholarships, still wore her hair natural, sometimes tied up in a wrap when the kitchen got too hot. And when she was asked for interviews on TV, in magazines, and on podcasts, she kept her answers simple. "I didn't save a billionaire," she would say. "I just paid attention." That humility was part of her magic. She wasn't trying to be a symbol. She wasn't looking for applause. But people needed someone like her. Someone who reminded them that being overlooked didn't mean being powerless. That courage wasn't loud. That sometimes it showed up in a diner uniform with tired feet and a sharp eye. Conrad visited the diner once a week now. Always sat at the same booth. Always ordered the same thing. Black coffee and a slice of Zariah's peach cobbler. He never stayed long, just enough to check in, to smile, to sit quietly in the place where his life had almost ended and had quietly been saved. One afternoon, as they cleaned up together after the lunch rush, he said, "You know, I spent decades thinking I was powerful, but I then never felt smaller than when I was lying in that casket, and you were the only one who knew I was ungone." Zariah didn't say anything right away, just wiped her hands on her apron, then looked at him. "I didn't know, Mr. Wexley," she said softly. "I just believed something felt off, and I followed it." He nodded. That's what most people forget. Power doesn't come from being right. It comes from noticing when something's wrong. The next morning, Zariah opened the diner early, before the sun rose, before the rush. Just her and the sound of the coffee maker brewing the first pot. She stood for a moment in the quiet, took a breath, and whispered to herself, "This is my life now. I didn't chase it, but I'll carry it." And she did. Not as a hero, not as a legend, but as a woman who paid attention, followed her instinct, and built something beautiful from the ashes of something broken. And that changed everything. The fall wind was soft that afternoon, blowing just enough to rustle the golden leaves lining the quiet trail behind Conrad Wexley's estate. He walked slowly with a cane now, not out of weakness, but as a reminder that every step was borrowed from a future he almost didn't get. His gait was steady, deliberate. The world, once a blur of meetings, headlines, and market reports, had slowed to something simpler. He liked it that way. Waiting for him on a wooden bench beneath an old oak tree was Zariah. She wore a soft maroon sweater and jeans, her hair tied back, a book resting on her lap. She stood up and walked over to him without thinking when she saw him coming. They used each other gently. They were connected by something deeper than bladder business, by truth, by survival. Hope the walk wasn't too rough, she said with a smile. Conrad chuckled. At this age, every walk feels like a workout. They sat side by side, watching the lake shimmer through the trees. A family of ducks drip lazily across the surface. For a while, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Then Conrad turned to her. You know, I built towers, he said. 45 of them, last I counted. Wexley Towers is in 6 states. Conference rooms in the sky, rooftop lounges, concrete and steel everywhere. Saria nodded. I used to think that was legacy, that glass end. Height somehow meant permanence. He paused, his eyes fixed on the water. But when I was in that casket, all I could think about was silence. The kind that gets inside your bones. No towers, no wealth, just the sound of nothing. That and your voice. She looked at him quietly. You said he's not dead, and it cut through everything like thunder in a graveyard. Her eyes grew glassy. I didn't know you could hear me. Oh, I did, he said softly. Every word. The wind shifted slightly. A few leaves floated down from above like confetti in slow motion. I've been thinking, he said, about what to do with everything I've built. I'm not the same man who sat at the top of that empire, and I don't want to pretend I can just go back. Zariah tilted her head. So, what will you do? He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a small black folder. He handed it to her. Inside were documents, legal and notarized. At the top, the Monroe Wexley Foundation. Zariah blinked. What is this? A new chapter, Conrad said. You and me. A non-profit, fully funded, focused on voices that get ignored. Scholarships for black students in underfunded schools. Legal defense for workers exploited in silence. Grants for community programs. And underdog entrepreneurs. Zariah stared at the papers, stunned. You want me to run this? I want you to lead it, he said. No corporate suits. No titles that don't mean anything. Just a mission. Purpose. You saw me when no one else did. Now I want to help you see others. Zariah looked up at him, speechless for a moment. Conrad, I'm not, she started, but he held up a hand. Don't tell me what you're not. Esidently, you're exactly what this world needs more of. Clear eyes, sharp gut, and a heart that doesn't flinch when it's time to stand up. She swallowed hard. What about Wexley Development? Already restructuring, he said. Carl's handling it. I'll sit on the board, but my time at the head is done. They sat in silence again. This time the silence felt like peace. Zariah slowly closed the folder and rested it on her lap. I never asked for any of this, she said. And that, Conrad replied, is why I trust you with all of it. A few moments later, they stood. He offered his arm, and she linked hers through his. Together they walked back toward the house. Not as a billionaire and a waitress, not as savior and survivor, but as partners, carrying something rare in their hands, something you couldn't buy or inherit. A second chance, and the promise not to waste it. It was late. The kinda late when the rest of the world had gone quiet. No traffic, no phones, no expectations. Just stillness. Zariah sat alone on the back porch of her apartment, a blanket wrapped loosely around her shoulders, a cup of hot chamomile tea resting in her hands. The night air was crisp, but not cold. Fall had settled in Charleston like a gentle exhale, the kind that makes you pause and take stock of everything. She stared up at the stars. It was the first time in weeks she had been alone, without questions, paperwork, or headlines. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't carrying anyone else's weight, no longer invisible, no longer surviving. Just Zariah, a woman who had walked through chaos and come out the other side without losing her softness. Her phone buzzed gently on the wooden table beside her. She ignored it at first, but the second buzz made her glance down. It was a message from Conrad. The lights still on at the diner. You okay? She smiled. Of course, he'd noticed. The blue magnolia had become her second skin, and even from a distance, he still paid attention. She typed back, just breathing, needed to remember what quiet feels like. A moment later, the phone buzzed again. Quiet is good. It's where we hear the truth the loudest. She read the message twice, then set the phone down. He was right. Truth didn't always show up in courtrooms or speeches or viral videos. Sometimes it arrives gently, curled in the corner of a quiet night, in the pause between thoughts, in the moments when no one's looking. She closed her eyes for a second and exhaled deeply. Then came a soft knock. It startled her. She stood, adjusting the blanket, stepping cautiously to the side gate. When she opened it, she blinked in surprise. Conrad stood there in a hoodie holding to take-out boxers. Didn't mean to startle you, he said with a sheepish grin. Figured if you're going to have a moment of quiet, it should at least come with pie. She laughed more out of shock than anything else, and opened the gate wider. You just show up with pie now. No warning. I'm retired, remember? Spontaneity is my new full-time job. They sat back on the porch together, steam rising from the food between them. It wasn't a date. It wasn't formal. It was something smaller, gentler. Two people who had walked through fire sitting quietly in its aftermath. Do you ever think about how all of this started? He asked. Zariah nodded. Every day, one strange smell, one scribbled note, one decision not to walk away. He took a sip of his coffee and looked out over the backyard. It's strange, he said, how sometimes it's the smallest choices that change everything. She looked over at him. Do you regret it trusting me? He turned, his expression soft. No, not for a second. You were the only person who looked beyond the noise, who didn't just see a body in a casket, but felt something was wrong. That obeyed me, but it also reminded me of who I used to be before power got in the way. They sat there for a while longer, the silence between them comfortable, like a song with no lyrics. Zariah leaned back, her head resting against the wall. I still don't know what all this means, she admitted. The foundation, the spotlight, people treating me like I'm something more than I ever planned to be. You don't have to know, Conrad replied. Just don't forget who you are, because who you are is why everything changed. She looked at him then, really looked. In that moment, he wasn't the billionaire she had once waited tables for. He was just a man, and she was just a woman. No spotlight, no crisis, just a short time of peace. And sometimes, that's where the real change happens. Not in the noise of the world, but in the silence that comes after it. Even the sharpest edges get softer over time. It doesn't make the past go away. It doesn't fix what's broken by itself, but it shows us how to deal with the scars. And sometimes it turns those scars into reminders of what we've been through, who we've become, and what still matters. Zariah Monroe never planned to be anyone's hero. She didn't ask for the headlines, didn't chase justice with a bullhorn. She simply listened to her gut, followed the truth, and refused. Stay silent when the world expected her to look the other way. That was her superpower. And sometimes, that's all it takes. Her life today is different in all the ways that count. She runs a foundation now, helped 200 students go to college, helped rewrite the future for voices that once felt invisible. But Zariah, still the same woman who keeps a box of handwritten thank you notes under her desk, still checks on her brother every morning before work, still stops by the Blue Magnolia on weekends just to help wash dishes and refill sweet tea, because some parts of you never change, and they shouldn't. Conrad Waxley, now fully retired, spends his time mentoring young entrepreneurs. He doesn't talk about market dominance anymore. He talks about ethics, about trust, about the cost of ignoring your conscience until it's too late. Every month, without fail, he and Zariah meet for lunch. No headlines, no speeches, just friends who remind each other where they've been and why they're still here. If there's a lesson to pull from all of this, it's simple. Don't underestimate the quiet ones. The waitress, the night nurse, the janitor, the grocery clerk, the bus driver, the people the world rushes past without noticing. Because more often than not, it's those exact people who carry the clearest vision, who feel when something is wrong, who see what others don't. And it's not just about instincts. It's about courage. The kind of courage that doesn't need a crowd to validate it. The kind that says, even if I'm the only one, I will not let this happen. Zarita once said she didn't save a billionaire. She just paid attention. But sometimes paying attention means saving someone. And maybe you've had someone like that in your life, too. Someone who stepped in, spoke up, or stayed close when things were going wrong. It could have been a teacher, a neighbor, a buddy, or maybe it was you. Maybe you've been someone's Zaraya without even realizing it. And if you have, thank you. You never know the full reach of a quiet act of courage. If this story moved you in some way, if it reminded you that kindness still matters, that voices still matter, and that change often starts with just one person noticing what others missed. Stay. This is Black Truth. We share stories that honor the unseen, the overlooked, and the ordinary people who make extraordinary choices. If you believe in the power of truth, if you believe that someone's worth isn't defined by money, fame, or power, but by what they do when no one's watching, this is your place. Hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment if someone ever stood by you when no one else did. And if you think other people need to hear this story, please share it, because sometimes one person who won't give up is all it takes to change the world. Thanks for coming in the next story. We'll see you. Until then, be nice. Don't fall asleep. Be brave.